Welcome back to Characters Like Us, a podcast where we explore the real world through diverse and inclusive storytelling in the books that we read and write. My name's Geetanshi, and I am a South Asian woman in my mid 20s. In my background, you can see a couch, a bookshelf, and a desk, as well as some art on the walls, and I am wearing a blue dotted shirt. Today is a very exciting relaunch of our podcast where we are going to start doing a ton of interviews with authors that we really admire and love who are going to share about the characters like them that they have written in their diverse and inclusive books. So, today, for our very first guest, I am so honored to introduce Léa Taranto. Léa Taranto is a disabled Chinese Jewish Canadian writer who lives with OCD and comorbid disorders. She is an MFA graduate of the University of British Columbia, alumnus of Simon Fraser University Writers Studio, and member of Prism's International Poetry Board. She resides on traditional unceded Hakka Minam and Squamish territories in BC, and her debut YA novel, A Drop in the Ocean, will be published on May 20th by Arsenal Pulp Press. Welcome, Léa.
Hi, it's so great to be here. I am a Asian and East Asian and white woman wearing a black shirt with black curly hair and bangs, and I have a white slash off-white kind of plain wall and a lamp in my background.
Thank you so much, Léa, for being here with me today. I am so excited to have you as the first guest on our podcast.
Woot woot! I'm excited to be here. I'm nervous, but just like really glad that we're going to be doing this together.
Yeah, me too. So, I want to start us off with this new opening segment that we have thought of called Numbered Narrative. So, within this segment, you're going to pick your favorite number between 1 and 34, and I will ask you a fun bookish question that corresponds to the number you picked, just as a little icebreaker.
Sounds good. I think the number I would choose is 9.
9. Okay, so question number 9 is: has a book ever made you cry? And what's the last book that made you cry?
So many books have made me cry. I think that the last book I can think of that made me cry was Amber Dawn's latest poetry collection, Buzzkill Clamshell.
Oh my gosh, I loved that one. I actually just read it like I want to say 2 weeks ago. Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I've never read a poetry collection about chronic pain that is quite like that one.
Yeah, I think Amber Dawn has an amazing range because like some of the poems kind of incorporated like mythology and then others incorporated like definitely just like the realities and like even speculative elements of like chronic pain. And then there was one that were had me laughing. Like it was just really cool to see that kind of skill.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm in an MFA program currently, and there's a professor in my program who teaches this class on the body and the erotic, very broadly. And as I was reading the collection, I was just like, I need to tell my professor to put this on the reading list for the next time they teach this class. I just felt like it was exactly like you said, covers so many different elements. And I mean, just looking at it as a writer, I was so impressed with all of the different things that she interweaves into it.
Yeah, and like how it all like works as a collection, like all like kind of they interlink really well. Yeah, I, I
Exactly.
I think it's really cool that you're going to recommend it to your pros.
Yeah, I just think that honestly, I go to a very I would say a much more diverse MFA program than I have heard of in comparison with a lot of the other MFA programs, but still I have not really encountered disability or chronic pain in a lot of the reading lists, and I feel like we will definitely be end up talking about this more later, but I do feel like despite the fact that disability is one of the largest minority groups, we still don't see so much representation when it comes to our literature and media, and especially representation that is like by and for disabled people.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And hopefully that can change in the future, and there are, I guess, steps that I think we're both kind of taking through our own writing to share our stories.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that your book is about to be out in the world and helping with this change. I would love to start out by just talking about, what was there an initial spark for this book, and if you could just talk a little bit about what your writing journey was like.
Yeah, so I had originally thought I would publish a fantasy series, and
Whoa.
yeah, like definitely really love fantasy and still do love speculative fiction. But was taking the TWS class at the writer studio and did an exploring like different genres course, and one of the assignments was to write a short story for a CNF class, a creative nonfiction class. So I wrote like just maybe like 2,500 or whatever words, and then when the mentor saw it, he was like, "Oh," and kind of I told him a little bit more. He was like, "This could be a whole novel." And so I decided to like, because I kind of knew how this story could end versus the story I was working on at the time required more research than I was able to give it. I was like, I'm going to pivot a little. And that is how this kind of project, he kind of started as a seed and very small and grew into, kind of 85,000 words.
Wow, that's incredible. And also the fact that it's a fiction novel, but it started as a creative nonfiction essay, it sounds like. What was the transition between those two genres? Did you start writing it as creative nonfiction and then it eventually became a fiction novel?
Yeah, so it's autofiction, but I did really want to start off more as memoir, and I was looking through all the old journals. I had about 13 or so journals from the 6 years I was in inpatient treatment, and I was reading them, and they were not good. They were very just much raw and not really in scene the way that I think creates an immediacy and the ability to kind of pull a reader in. So I had to do a lot of imagining of like, oh, what did this feel like? What kind of smells were around? What was I probably like wearing at the time, and how did my body feel when that anxiety was kind of coursing through my veins? And so that, and also a big part was, I guess, just kind of keeping folks' privacy. So I created some composite characters instead of and used pseudonyms. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I We were chatting about this a little bit before we started recording, but when I also have like kind of a shelved project right now that was very autofiction of when I was becoming ill as a young adult, and I found that process and it also involved me looking through some of my journals and all stuff like that, and I found it really just like emotionally difficult to do, and I'm curious, what was that like for you? And were there things that kind of got you through that? And like, what was your like driving force behind it?
But this is going to um, be a little bit of a backstory. But my fiance, this was kind of during the like very start of the pandemic. We he was having a lot of mental health challenges as well, and um, ended up taking his life. And in 2021, when I was working on this project, and I found that it was because we met in treatment, and I was writing about like one of the big things I was writing about was us meeting and how I marked that kind of time as like when I started finding things in the morning to look forward to, and like how much he had really inspired and helped me. And I saw this as a way to kind of that he could kind of live on through the character Nick. And I also dedicated the book to him. And then I also found it kind of like a basically beacon and lighthouse kind of during this maelstrom of all this grief, to be able to focus on something meaningful that he had seen the start of, and been really encouraging about. And I saw it as a way to kind of honor him, but also to not focus so much on the pain. Yeah.
That's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. I now we've brought up Nick, so I did want to get into talking a little bit about the book. I loved that there is this supportive cast of characters around our protagonist as she is in this OCD treatment ward. And I wanted to ask you a question basically about the existing representation of OCD that we see in books and especially TV and film, and how so much of it is formed around these same few tropes like excessive cleaning. And I that this is just like we've talked about this, and it's just one small form and theme that OCD has. And I wanted to talk about and discuss with you, like, how does this representation that you already see influence you to write something that has been more real to your lived experience and also the lived experience of other people that you know?
I think that the representation we see on screen, like Monk from the detective show, and Emma, the guidance counselor in Glee, maybe it feels intuitive to see the cleaning because you can see the obsessions of like the fear of contamination, and then the compulsions, the actions of like excessive washing. But that's just the tip of the OCD iceberg. I kind of call it a shape shifting parasite because it not only changes mind to mind, but it also changes throughout the years. So you can start off with one sort of kind of theme of things that you're really fearing and the compulsions that you do to alleviate that fear, and end up with something entirely different. There's a lot of just different things that OCD goes after, and often it's your values. So for some folks, that could be harm OCD, where they're afraid of hurting loved ones. And so then the compulsions are more being away from anything that could be weapon like, or not spending time with those loved ones because they're so worried about what they might do and the intrusive thoughts. And another, even just on the subject of intrusive thoughts, could be that somebody has more thought based compulsions, even. So they're not actions, but they're more maybe you have a bad thought and you have to think a good thought to neutralize it. There's so many forms OCD takes. Yeah, and mine have really changed throughout the years. When I was first kind of experiencing symptoms, it was more related to an eating disorder, and so the exercise that I did became very excessive and ritualistic. Then, when I was more immersed in like a Christian treatment facility, and because my papa maternal grandma was very Christian, um, I became having intrusive thoughts and obsessions about sins in a past life and certain self-harm behaviors that I believed saved my loved ones and redeemed me. Whereas now, in my 30s, I have more just right kind of OCD, and just right kind of is a term for when maybe feels the urge to repeat something or do something, like maybe it's a certain chore or like the way things are arranged a certain number of times and in a certain kind of very perfectionistic manner, and then that it feels right. And if it feels wrong or isn't done in that way, then it has to be performed again. So it grows and morphs so much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so significant that you discuss in the representation you have in this book. We really see throughout the range of characters how their OCD behaviors differ, and also some of the things that you mentioned we see in our main character, like especially like we see how a lot of her behaviors that we're focusing on are based on her fear of what is going to happen to her mother if she does not do them. And from the lived experience of the people with OCD that I know, I have found that that is such something that is so common that I've actually never seen represented in media before. So it's really amazing that you did that. And I am going to be recommending this book to all of them, and also just everyone, because I feel like we it's so like there's the point of like, okay, we need more disability representation, but then as with any minority representation, we get to that point of when there's one piece of representation, there's this double-edged sword of everyone in the community wants to feel represented by it, but, how can they? Because there's so many diverse experiences within, for example, OCD, that not everyone is going to relate to each other. And I'm sure there are aspects of it that people can relate to, but not everyone has the same experience or the same comorbidities. And they're just like, there's such a diversity of experiences. And then on the other end, for people who perhaps don't understand and are trying to understand better, it's not, you can't just read one representation and think you understand everything there is to know about, like, for example, like watching the movies that you mentioned or the shows that you mentioned. And one that's coming to my mind recently that I saw was Turtles All the Way Down, which also has OCD representation. I remember reading that book as a kid, and it was kind of like the only OCD representation I saw. And that it's like a completely different from, what you were writing here, and they're both OCD representation. But it's just, I think it's so important to have that diversity of representation and of authentic own voices representation as well. um, I think there are so many various OCD tropes that you also combat within this book. And one of them, just generally, is how psych wards are shown often in books and the media as like in a horror context, and often they will be within horror movies. And the only example that I can think of that is not that was like the latest season of Heartstopper, which I'm not sure if you've seen, but the protagonist in that series has an eating disorder, and they show him going to a psych ward around many other people who have eating disorders and other comorbidities. And it is, he actually ends up having a good experience, but the show is very clear to point out that, oh, I feel lucky to have had this experience, because not every experience is like this. For some people, it makes things worse. And I think this is a question that you tackle in your book as well. And I would love to hear how you feel like your book fits into this conversation.
Um, Thank you. Yeah, I definitely feel like I've had a mixed experience. I did have, especially when I was, I guess, more treatment adverse, because I truly believed I had to do certain compulsions to save my mom's life, and if I couldn't do them, um, then she would die. So I was maybe a little bit more hostile towards staff and different kind of people on the treatment team. But then also, I feel like I was able to meet kind of just the right people at the right time that helped me see beyond kind of just the fear. And when I started to kind of open up and even explain more where my fears were coming from, a lot of the experiences I had were really meaningful and positive. I guess I can't ever really predict or like, you know, narrow down what one person's experience is going to be like. But for, I guess, maybe folks who are thinking about entering treatment or are in treatment, the people that you're with, the other patients and the people on your treatment team, they're as human as you are. They are probably going to make mistakes. But if you really work with them and communicate what your needs, you can make some long, lifelong kind of connections and that are beautiful friendships.
Oh, that's amazing. And do you are you still friends with people who you went to treatment with?
Yes. Besides Sean, the character Nick is based on, or Nick, the character Sean is based on, who I was also really good friends with, Elsie, who is a nurse that Mira really has a full circle kind of relationship with, and they go from really hitting each other to kind of finding things to bond over. She and I still kind of go out for coffee, every like maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and she was really happy about this book. So yeah, and I have some other patient friends that I maybe they like you live kind of throughout the country, but we do a lot of like messaging and zooming. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. You mentioned this earlier as well, and as a form of autofiction, you ended up like combining certain people from your real life into characters, and now you're mentioning some people uh, that characters in your novel are based on. And you mentioned what it was like with this, how supportive one of your friends was, and I'm curious. Was this in the process of writing, were you showing this novel to those people, and did you kind of like, I guess, get their permission or tell them that characters were based on them, or what was that process like?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to kind of have conversations with all the folks that are have kind of bigger roles in the novel that are also in my life, and I was able to have positive feedback from everyone. I also created composite characters, though. So one of the composite characters would be Sweets, and she's like Mira's kind of best friend, and she's based on a few different like folks that I was really close to throughout the different years that I was in treatment. So that's another way, I guess, that the fictionalization aspect kind of came in is it's very condensed, the progress that happens in the book. Whereas in my actual lived experience, it was kind of more throughout 6 years. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. And is that a change you made primarily for plot purposes?
Yeah.
That makes sense. I The next question I had for you was that if we could talk a little bit about the stigma associated with mental health and psychiatric disorders, because we haven't really touched on that yet.
Mm.
Just like on a societal and cultural level, I really appreciated the way that you approached it in such a real way throughout the book. And one example that is just coming to mind for me is to what is told to Mira's family, and extend by family I mean extended family, about what she is going through. Because there are a couple of scenes in the book where, I'm thinking of one in particular, but I'm not going to spoil it. But there's this scene where there's a number of members of extended family and friends that kind of like would be questioning where she is or what she's up to, and instead of telling the truth about what Mira is up to and where she's at, there's this like, oh, she has some vague health condition, and like also talking about it more as like a physical or like medical, that it's basically like a non-psychiatric medical health condition, in a way to like legitimize it, or a way to reduce the stigma. And I just thought that it was frustrating but felt so real, and I would love to just like chat about that with you.
Yeah. I think that uh, stigma kills. And to this day, there are, I think, different layers of stigma that come from different kinds of intersectionalities, like, being BIPOC and being queer, and like the way that the healthcare system is very white supremacist and cishet and capitalist. So I think that, for example, I guess like I can think of my own personal experience learning that my Halgong and other maternal elder family members, elders, were institutionalized for mental illness as well. But that was not something that I had ever heard of until I was older. And I think that's really because people kind of assimilate as a way to survive. And so anything that is harder that would kind of prevent you from being able to blend in and be that like kind of striving immigrant ideal it is kept kind of hidden unless you're kind of really close to it because there's just already so many things that are happen against people of color in these communities. And I think for queer folks, it's the same kind of thing where then your gender and sexuality are being pathologized, and instead of being accepted. Um, I Yeah, I think another example is maybe the worldview that you are raised with, and if you're from different cultures that it doesn't necessarily fit into the really clinical kind of white terminology. Maybe you view things more with like a traditional Chinese medicine lens, where you have symptoms and you kind of treat them through those means. So there's, I think, a lot of different ways that stigma can manifest, and they all kind of build up and compound.
Thank you so much for bringing all of that up. And this is something that I really try to do. And I guess trying is not even the right word because it's just like also my lived experience as like a disabled first generation immigrant daughter who is queer. I feel like there all of those things about like especially about like the medical system that you brought up in it being so ableist capitalist white supremacist, it just like it touches every aspect of your treatment and like the doctors that you see and especially your access to those doctors in the first place. And on top of that, then you also have like the cultural stigma that you're facing on the other end, where what it's there's like traditional Asian medicine. There is something to be said about the way that like, a lot of Western healthcare systems just like kind of treat things with medicine and not looking at just looking at symptoms and not actually like trying to see what's going on with someone and just like throwing medicine at everything. There is like a side of that that kind of like makes me understand that perspective of being very like, focusing on like the natural and herbal medicines. But at the same time, especially when it comes to mental health and psychiatric conditions, I feel like it is often taken to like this extreme of like, oh, if there isn't something like that that could help you that we have like in our dictionary of like herbs or whatever it is, then it must not be real. It's in your head is kind of used as a like, oh, it's not real.
Yeah.
And I mean, you even see this with like chronic pain and like other things that people can't see on like a scan or like whatever it is. And especially when it comes to, we see this in Mira's like family dynamics with the grandparents, and, there's also religion mixed in there. Like, there's so many different intersectional identities that can cause you to have, like, a totally different experience navigating something like this than somebody else. And, like, I think this is why it's so, so significant to have stories written by intersections of these identities.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely feel like, um, yeah, a lot of time people can be dismissed if there isn't that proof, and or if they're, you're like a patient who is more problematic because you're not seeking recovery immediately, and um, it's really awful how you can be kind of shut down by loved ones and by the people who, well, the healthcare professionals who are there to help you, but are not really validating anything that you're saying.
I think that just captures like the loneliness that's involved because you're facing stigma from basically every side. You're facing stigma from everyone who's supposed to help you and be there for you and care about you. And I also think like going back to what I said kind of at the beginning, it's what makes like Mira's friends and Nick so significant in this story. And it really like warmed my heart to see. And it's not that it's without their challenges, because we see Nick and Mira go through some challenges and frustrations with each other as well. And that felt so real. That felt so real. But I loved that, we can see that often, and I find this too, is that often the only people who can really get you and understand you and have that level of forgiveness and understanding is from the people who experience things that are similar and maybe like know it like very close to what you're going through. And as much as like your family loves you, that can be really difficult sometimes.
Definitely. Yeah, like, I think even just, people, will be like, "Oh, Leia, why does it take you so long to wake up in the morning?" And I'm like, "'Cause my meds make me really groggy and I have, these compulsions that I need to do." And, for folks who don't, live it with me, who and I live on my own, they don't see that, right? So they're just like, "Oh, it's, probably she's just, sleeping in," or things like that. And it's,
Yeah.
whereas somebody who has similar experiences, they understand. And I think that's like a really powerful thing about like connecting with people who have different lived experiences. And it's yeah, I think, even on a writing level, capitalism can come in with like the, word count, and they're like, oh, you have to write every day, like all these kind of
Yep.
rules that kind of come in to like practice when that's not realistic. And I mean, everybody kind of had that mentality. There'd be a lot of really beautiful, important books that would never have been written even.
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. For like the longest time last year, I was like asking around like, "Oh, how are people getting their writing done within like their MFA program and like also working part-time?" And like so many people were like, "Yeah, you just have to force yourself to wake up at like 5 in the morning and then every morning you write and you can't skip a day of writing." And I tried to do it unsuccessfully for I want to say like 6 months straight because I just felt like that was the only way that like I don't know, I was like this is what everyone else is doing. And then I got to a point I was actually reading Care Work by have you read it by Leah Lakshmi?
I've heard of it and I would like to read it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, just like, okay, you have to read just like the opening note that she has in that book, or like the first couple of pages, because she talks about, I wrote this, most of this book from bed. And like, there are so many different ways that like the queer crip community like does writing differently. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe like these are my people. I can do it. It was just like so nice to read. And I think like, your email and this book, I think it's so important because once we start like asking for our needs and also like normalizing our needs, and I think like that influences other people to do that too.
Definitely, yeah. And like even I think like normalizing like, intrusive thoughts, and like they can be really against your values, but like everybody has them. And we also get to choose then like how much importance we put on them, and we can realize that like a thought is doesn't mean it's true. And
Yeah.
like thinking something that, is not who you are doesn't make you a bad person.
Yeah, like those intrusive thoughts, for example, about like harm coming to your family because of what you're doing. I used to have those as well and sometimes still do. And like part of me was actually wondering as I was reading your book, I was like, I wonder if there there's some cultural influence here when like as an immigrant kid, as often there's like a lot more responsibility that you're shouldering, and often you're helping your parents acclimate to your surroundings and things like that. And also just being a person of color, and your parents being your cultural tie, and like there's so much to that relationship. And as I was reading the book, I was like, I feel like this could be an example of like, you know perhaps this sort of intrusive thought is more common in certain populations because of what is involved within their identity and growing up experience.
I definitely think that factors in, and like what you kind of are immersed by, that's kind of what your brain has to work with, and that's when your brain can, take that and um, kind of turn it into intrusive thoughts. So I think that, yeah, like being like, you know, somebody from like a community that sees more the collective as and values the collective versus the
Exactly.
individual, you put a lot of like emphasis on like how much you can contribute to your family.
Yeah, and also how like everything you do impacts your family and impacts the collective, and I can totally see like the connection between those two things. I wanted to ask you before we get to our very last question. You mentioned I actually wanted to ask it right then and then it slipped my mind, but you initially mentioned that you were working on a fantasy series. So I wanted to ask, well, first, are you going to resume working on that fantasy series? And if you're writing anything new right now, and if there's anything you can tell us about that.
So yeah, the thing that I'm writing right now, which I'm really enjoying, but also like really wanting to do the right kind of research for, is a historical speculative novel that's set in like the Vancouver's kind of lower mainland area in the 1960s, and it
Wow.
follows two Chinese Canadian sisters who are teens. Mei Sing and Mei Yi, and both of the sisters are able to access the spirit world through their dreams and interact with Shenlong, like these kind of dragons from Chinese folklore that produce rain and are in charge of the weather. And so one of the Missing the elder sister is very, very close to her maternal grandma, and her maternal grandma passes away, and that triggers for her her first kind of experience with a depressive episode. And she then later on becomes diagnosed with bipolar 2, where she has more hypomania. And this we follow Mei in treatment where she meets other folks with different connections to the spirit world. Whereas Mei, we follow as she's trying to kind of, do a lot of like bridging of the kind of dissidence between her parents and her elder sister, and kind of see how she navigates the stigma that she faces just from like her sister being all the way in treatment. And it's also about, I guess, like how do dreams and how does your mindset help when you're surrounded by people and a system that thinks hurting you is for your own good.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so interesting. I'm so excited to read this. And so many of the themes, I can see like some similar themes between this new book and and A Drop in the Ocean. But wow, I love the range of everything that you said. And I'm so curious, is this the fantasy book that you were working on back in that workshop that you were talking about?
Yes, yes. I got like maybe 20,000 words or so done. And then I was like, oh, this is going to require a lot more kind of like planning. And I want to just do it justice and devote like all the time that I need to doing it properly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. I love those elements of like Chinese folklore and the spirit world. And also, while at the same time, it kind of sounds like an urban fantasy where, you're kind of still set in the real world and, seeing all of these other issues that are arising. And I love what you said about, there's this quote that I read recently about how it's in, I think it was in Madeline Miller's book, Galatea, the short story. um I think the quote is like, I am worth more to them sick than I am well. What you just said at the end of what the themes you're working on in this book just reminded me of that so much.
Wow. Yeah. That I really like Madeline Miller. So I'm going to have to read Galatea.
So, we also have a new closing segment for our interviews. And since our podcast is called Characters Like Us, we want to ask you this question to kind of like wrap up all the things that we've discussed and also the theme of this podcast. And that question is, what would you say to someone who sees themselves in the characters that you have written in this book?
I just wanted to say, yeah, like you're not alone. And um, no matter how weird or scary or vivid and powerful your thoughts are, or how terrifying and excruciating your feelings are, you're a person with value and power, a human freaking being, as Mira would say. And no matter where you go, you will always be in your own mind, which is why it's really, really important, like more than I can stress, that you find ways to be your own ally. I think for a lot of folks, we're taught to base our worth on performance or on fitting in. So when we don't fit in or have things about us that, aren't maybe what we'd hoped and don't fit that aspirational perfectionistic element, we view ourselves as bad. And then when you pair that with the belief that the more you hate a bad thing, the more it proves that you're against it and therefore good. People can spiral from like low self-esteem to believing that they're worthless. And that happens a lot, unfortunately, especially I think with young adults. But you can't hate or yourself. You can't hate or hurt yourself into being a better person. And that's something I think that I hope kind of comes across in the book. And even more, that you're worthy because you exist. And because you exist, you have the power to make the world a better place. You are so much stronger and braver and kinder than you think. Just, it can be hard to feel like you deserve it, but give yourself some of that kindness too. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Leah, thank you so much for those words and for being here. And that was just like the perfect way to close this podcast. And I like felt all those words that you were saying, and you're such a kind and generous and lovely person. And I've loved chatting with you. And thank you for gifting the world with this book that you have, taken from your heart.
Thank you so much. I feel the same way about you. Like, just you're really helping me with this process by being like friendly and patient. And I'm so stoked for your book as well when it comes out. And yeah, just thank you for having me on Characters Like Us.
Oh, thank you so much. So, in closing, Leia's debut novel, A Drop in the Ocean, is coming out very soon on the 20th of this month. And you can find Leia on Instagram at Léa Taranto Writes and on her website, leataranto.com. If you want to learn more about OCD, Leia recommends the International OCD Foundation's website, iocdf.org. Also, for a compiled list of international crisis and suicide hotlines, you can visit findahelpline.com and blog.opencounseling.com/suicide-hotlines. You can find all of these links in the description down below. And also make sure to follow our Instagram on at Characters Like Us Pod to stay tuned as to all of our new episodes and also our favorite clips and segments from this episode that we are going to post online. And thank you all for listening. And thank you again, Leia, for being here. Yay!
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. See you all next time.
Take care, everyone.